dimension with its own brain, its own voice, its own legs. There's only one problem. It needs your eyes. Virtual Boy. See it now in 3D.
Hey, what's up guys? It's Rick with the Digital Divide. Today I want to talk about the Virtual Boy. This is such an interesting system to me because it's the first mainstream 3D console that was ever released and Nintendo's first 32-bit system that not a lot of people talk about. The Virtual Boy was released on July 21st, 1995 in Japan and August 16th, 1995 in North America. Nintendo priced the Virtual Boy at $179.95, which was relatively high at the time of its release. The CPU is a NEC V810 32-bit RISC chip, making the Virtual Boy Nintendo's first 32-bit system. The Virtual Boy used a pair of 1x224 linear arrays, which is one per eye. They rapidly scan across the eye's field of view using flat, oscillating mirrors. These mirrors vibrate back and forth at a very high rate of speed. Each Virtual Boy game has a yes or no option to automatically pause every 15 to 30 minutes so the player can take a break to avoid eye injuries, and we'll touch on that later. The system also had one speaker per ear, which provided stereo audio. One of the biggest issues with the Virtual Boy was that it was meant to be played in a seated position, so that really limited the viability of its use as a portable system. It wasn't quite powerful enough to compete with traditional home consoles, and although it was significantly more powerful than, say, the Game Boy, for example, the Game Boy was much more portable. You could play it anywhere, whereas with the Virtual Boy, you couldn't really play it on a car or an airplane because it needed to be able to stand itself. The system launched with a total of 4 games. Those games were Mario Tennis, which was actually a pack-in title with the console, as well as Galactic Pinball, Tolero Boxer, and Red Alarm. Red Alarm is an interesting one in my memory because I remember playing this at a demo kiosk at my local Toys R Us and I was blown away by the visuals. It's true that it's only using a wireframe polygon system, there's no textures or anything, and it is fairly rudimentary, but it was a huge step over anything I had seen from a Nintendo platform up until that point, and you're not really seeing the 3D effect in this video, but it was really impressive at the time. Another great example of a game that utilizes the hardware is Wario Land. Again, it's hard to tell in this video, but the perspective that you gain was huge. Wario Land used the 3D of the system to make multiple planes of movement and some really creative puzzles. It was a very impressive game and probably my favorite one for the system.
He's the epitome of evil. And he's on the prowl in the 3rd dimension. It's Wario. The diabolical one has gone 3D, where evil runs deep and danger comes out of nowhere in the most incredible adventure ever seen on Virtual Boy. It's Wario Land, a 3D game for a 3D world.
Wait till they get a load of me!
Another game that took good advantage of the 3D perspective was Mario Tennis. It made seeing the positioning of the ball much easier because it had depth. And again, you're not seeing that in this video, but when you're actually using the headset, it was quite impressive, especially for the time. Now, I'm sure you've noticed that the number one issue with this system is that it was only capable of displaying various shades of red, which was a huge issue and for a lot of people caused some pretty severe eye strain after prolonged use of the device. I really think this is the biggest problem with the console, and I honestly believe that if Nintendo had developed the console with the capability to display more colors, it would have been a huge success. I think limiting it to one was its biggest downfall. Now, the Virtual Boy's library consisted of a grand total of 22 games across all territories. Only 14 of those were released in the United States before the system was eventually discontinued. The overwhelming majority of those games were published by Nintendo, which was another huge issue the Virtual Boy had, a lack of third-party support. Virtual reality was a brand new and untested platform at the time, so a lot of third-party developers were hesitant to take the dive and start developing for that platform, and they just ignored it as a result. Now, I want to talk about the controller for the Virtual Boy for a little bit. The Virtual Boy, being a system with heavy emphasis on three-dimensional movement, needed a controller that could operate along a Z-axis. The Virtual Boy's controller was an attempt to implement dual digital D-pads to control elements in the aforementioned 3D environment. This would come before analogs were a mainstream component for every video game console. Although it might look goofy, this controller was actually surprisingly comfortable to use. Nintendo of America originally projected hardware sales of 1.5 million units and software sales of 2.5 million in its first year of release, but they only ended up shipping a total of 350,000 units by December of 1995, around 3.5 months after its North American release. This makes the system one of the worst-selling consoles of all time. The last game that was officially released for the Virtual Boy was 3D Tetris on March the 22nd of 1996. There were more games announced for the system at the E3 Expo in May of 96, but those games were never released. Today, VR is a huge industry in the tech space, with Oculus VR being the leader. But big players like Sony are getting ready to launch their second-generation VR headset for the PlayStation 5, so the genre of virtual reality has a lot of room to grow. I think Nintendo was ahead of its time. It's interesting to think about what the current state of VR would look like had the Virtual Boy been a success, but that's going to do it for me today, guys. As always, thank you for watching.